Okay. This event came from kind of a kernel of idea like a month ago, not much more than a month ago, where we were chatting inside of an office at Chazen with an idea, and Daria Malin in a vision said, "It sounds like kind of fun," to a point 2, 3 weeks ago where we said, "Oh, geez, this event's coming up. Let's just run it at full speed," to hoping that anybody would come. And this is great because the truth is nobody has time. Every professional I work with is slammed, and it's tricky to get home on time for your family, let alone taking an hour to come over here or mentor. Students are booked. Everybody's busy, and I've found that's the defining thing about the professional world. Nobody has any time. So the motivating factor for setting up an event like this, or some of the work that we're trying to do through Expertise Project, is to just adopt a penny in a jar strategy, where nobody has. There are professionals that want to mentor, but they don't have hours. But they can sit for a video at 45 minutes at lunch. Uh, Students it's just, this event is kind of an attempt to get everybody together, because when we had 100 conversations, this common thread was we want interpersonal contact. We just don't have any time to do it. So we had the event at Brown's because killing 2 hours at Brown's isn't going to kill anybody. So that's kind of an introduction into the general idea, which is just a way to say thank you. Introductions are probably good. My name is Mike Barron. I'm a structural engineer at the Chazen Companies. And I'll go right in the list. A son of a contractor and social worker. Say it. All the social workers in the crowd. I'll do more shameless plugs. I love working with architects, looking this direction over at Envision. Taking an amorphous concept in somebody's head and dragging it closer to reality is what they do, and it's thankless. Love commiserating with educators. Chris Letchford and everybody in your educators have it tough. You have your own pressures and a curriculum to maintain and things to grade. And hearing that you want more contact with professionals is a motivating factor behind this. And I love mentoring students too, because when I graduated, I was bad. I was almost a net negative to my employer. I'm just saying. It took 2 or 3 years just to be able to provide something that resembled value. And I'm not the only person. It's like a common problem that we all have, is an employer will hire an entry-level person with a 3.5 or a 4.0, and it's like they're just almost guaranteed to take 80 grand and throw it in the garbage for the first year to bring you up to speed. And employers are saying, that's tough. There's a disconnect where just getting everybody in the room to share stories, to say what's happening in the field, to bring that into the classroom so students can have the real world examples at the same time they're learning the content. That's, I think, the missing piece. So that's the scheme that kind of brought us all here. And again, this is just a general thank you. I will do more specific thank yous as the night go on, so this isn't turned into a weird Academy Award rushed, disingenuous thank you list, right? But just to let you know, there's a lot of people in the room that not only are spending time forked over dough to rent the hall, put out food. It's a real investment, and they didn't have to do it. So I'll do thank yous as we go. As we go. One of the things I dangled as an incentive for RPI students is that Chris Letchford, who, I don't know if you can tell by his attire where he is in the middle of the room right now. It's a kilt. I won't say who's wearing the kilt, right? Chris is the man. Not to be too, again, shameless and doling out that compliment to every person, Phil, Joe, Daria. Chris has been the chair of the RPI Civil Engineering Department, Civil and Environmental Engineering Department, since 2010-ish. And when I graduated from RPI in 2006, the program was different than when I came back. The program was different when I was there to when Chris is there. Chris sat down for an interview, sharing his time earlier this year where he shared thoughts about engineering education, what he looks for in students, a whole host of things. And the thing that I enjoy the most is it's, Chris, what were the two letters that you used to? Uh, C and E. Right? C and E, civil engineering. Is that correct? Not quite correct. The two main traits that you said that you enjoyed, and you'll be up on stage in the round table, and or if you want to grab the mic during story time, just come on out. You look for students that are curious and empathetic. And I think it's exactly right. I won't take the words out of your mouth. You'll be up here before. But one of the things I dangled before and I thought I would share was just a brief video of Chris. I asked the question, like, what should students not do in your curriculum? Like, what are, like, not good moves to do? And Chris is like, I'll tell you a couple things they should do and shouldn't do. And I dangled that as an incentive to come. Matt, if you want to throw that one video up, let's see if it works. Don't do's. Not like to-dos, but just don't do these 6 things.
So let's start with the 6 things that I wish students would do.
Sure.
Okay, and that is to ask questions, to be curious. Okay, I do exit interviews with seniors every year, and I ask them the question: what would you, like to tell a freshman now that you've been through this 4 years? What would you recommend? And by and large, they all say the same thing: ask questions, ask for help, realize when you don't know something, and ask for help. And as a raw new engineer, that was clearly what I did. I didn't know. I wasn't going to sit in a corner and try and hide until something happened. It was all about going and seeking help, and understanding that you don't know everything, and your boss doesn't expect you to know everything, but they do expect you to recognise when you don't know something and go and seek help. So I think that's the most important thing, ask for help. I really don't like people who are grade orientated, so it really frustrates me to have students want to know what they should do to get a good grade, or how they can get extra credit, or that. I really like people who are focused on really the understanding rather than the mark.
Nudge, nudge.
We're getting more and more teamwork. Promoting teamwork is hard, in a sense, in engineering in one way, because the degree is for an individual. It's not for a group. We have to give individuals degrees, and so it's really important that we have the ability to assess the individual, but also, as I've talked already, this is about people. Engineering is about people. It's about working with people who are going to add to your skill set, not detract from it. And so it's really important that people know how to work with each other, and I think we try and do that with teams in various courses at RPI, but that can be done better. What I don't like students to do is to focus on grades only. That's the opposite of what I've just said. I don't like them to think that they know everything, and that I know everything. I don't know everything. And I really enjoy being challenged on a topic that I don't know, that I have to come back to and say, I'm going to have to look that up. I'm going to have to work out what you mean by that, and if I can get a better answer to what I'm giving you. So I really like that ability, because that's demonstrating curiosity. And I think it's also demonstrating empathy in a sense. I don't understand this either. I'm going to have to go and work on it.
So, just my own commentary. I'm biased, but I think he's right. Like it was super easy to get a B. Kind of phone it in, get a B, move on to the next thing. Whatever you learn that semester, you're just going to forget. Move to the next assignment. Rinse and repeat. Forget. And that's like the common thread that happened to me. I don't think I'm alone. We see it a lot when we onboard students. You've gotten straight A's. Now it comes to apply it creatively, and nothing comes out because it's forgotten. It's not a good thing, but it happens to everybody. So let's get our group session together and talk about our problems. Okay. What I wanted to do during this stretch, and we'll see how it goes, was instead of having a lecture, instead of having video montage where we all sit and watch the same videos. It was just to adopt the strategy that we almost don't need to learn anything new in the room. Like the stuff that's all lurking in our brains and accessible to each other, it's everything we need to know. Like if I could take a cord and put it in the back of Vic's head or Tim's head, see Jeff Bach there. Jeff was the first guinea pig for this video series, and soon you'll be seeing Jeff Bach videos too. Right? There's 10 professionals in the Capital District that volunteered the little time they had, an hour, hour and a half, 45 minutes to do it. So over the course of the semester, we'll put out more and more of these videos when I can find the time. With a young family and a very busy deliverable schedule coming up, and look at my colleagues over here. In the spirit of being the first guinea pig, I'll be the first guinea pig to tell a story. If anybody then here, a professional, wants to jump up and tell a story that they think is worth of telling, just come on up. If nobody comes up, I'll tell a second story and a third story. And if it's a flop, Phil Cohen will come back up and play more music, which is still a win, right? But if you have something that the only rules are no yearbook answers, and it has to be a story you want to hear at a bar, hear yourself, right? It doesn't have to be dry and whatever. And I'll be the first guinea pig. So story number one is the time when I'm happy that I wasn't crushed, and then I'm regretful that I got on the plane. Okay. When I was a junior engineer, so I graduated in 2006, and the economy was very hot, and I looked out on a first job working for a firm in Boston. They were just trying to find people to get in, and that's how I kind of slipped through the door. Right? I was underqualified, and I was assigned to be a junior engineer on a project in Philadelphia. Okay. It was a tall structure, and they just needed somebody to review every steel beam before it was fabricated. Now, this is going to sound stupid because I'm 34. Dating myself is not, I'm not going to be dating myself too much, but I remember back in the day when submittals came on paper, okay? Now it's submitted in PDFs and Bluebeam markups electronically. It's great because I used to have to fold thousands of pieces of paper to the point where I lost my fingertips. Like I lost my fingerprints by just folding sheets of paper to get in FedEx every night. Oh, 10 years ago, I tell you, those were tough times. But every once in a blue moon, somebody from our team had to visit the site and just take a look around. So they said, send Mike. He'll go for 2 days. Sounds good. And without getting boring into the details, every building moves. Like every structure is a string, is a spring. You can't get a force out of a spring unless you stretch it. Every building moves. This one, anyone. So one of the jobs of a structural engineer is just to make sure that the springs don't break and everybody dies, one. And two, make sure everything isn't so springy it freaks everybody out. Like if you walk across a bridge that's jumping up and down, you could be safe, but it's going to freak you out. So those are the two main things you're always dealing with. So on this big tower, it was going to be full of researchers, and they had to have glass conference rooms to look out on the Philadelphia skyline. And they didn't want to have any columns. The architect team didn't want to have any columns in the glass view. So the columns had to be pulled back from the edge of the building here to over here. So the main structure was back here, and every conference room was like a diving board. It was cantilevered out to here. It's fine. But if you're out on a diving board and somebody's walking in the hall over there, you kind of feel a bounciness, right? The senior engineering team knew that, so they're like, well, we got to make sure there's no bounciness out there. So they came up with a clever idea where it was a little fussy, but it was clever. Okay, we're going to put the steel structure down. That's cool. We're going to pour concrete down on the diving board, and the concrete's going to, deflect the steel structure, so the load comes back here. That's cool. And then after all the concrete's poured, all the way up all these stories, we're going to take a 4-inch post, or 4-inch tie, whatever. It was just a 4-inch pipe, and then we'd stick it here connect it to the floor above, to connect it to the floor above, to connect it to the floor above. So the idea is if somebody's walking on the 4th floor, those vibrations aren't going to matter if all the floors are connected. It was clever. But the trick was you pour the concrete first, let the load go this way, and then you tie those 4-inch pipes. And there were like 60 of them, something. But elsewhere on the job, there were 3 6-inch diameter hangers where you had to switch the order. You had to make sure that the load that was welded first and then pour the concrete, because this area, which is roughly the size of this room, was being hung from the floor above. A 6-inch hanger, a 4-inch tie, clear as day difference, unless you're anybody who's not a structural engineer. And then it just looks like a round circle thing that needs to be welded at some point. So anyway, I go down to a site visit, walking around. It's a hot day. I got to take a taxi, no Uber back then, take a taxi back to get back to catch a flight. And it was like the last half an hour, and the superintendent on the site goes, "Don't worry, Mike. We made sure not to weld any of those hangers, tie things, anywhere on the job so far. We're going to do that at the end." And I'm like, the slabs are all poured on these levels. I'm thinking to myself, that's impossible, because if that's not welded, everything in the size of this room, which weighs tons, there's nothing below it. And if you're not hung from something, it can't be there. So I'm like, "Oh, Jim, okay, let's go over to the 3rd floor and just check a couple things out. Sounds good." So we're walking down, mortified to this area, and the concrete's poured, it's fine. And we walk over to these 6-inch hangers, and by the grace of God, the erector just happened to put an erection bolt or 2 through there, just as a placeholder, so the thing wouldn't flop in. Both of the bolts were like bent over at a V. So they've failed. And it's like, holy. Okay. So here's something I did right, followed by something I did wrong. So Dear Diary, right? What I did right was, I'll make up the contractor's name, I forget. Hey, Lawrence. Okay, I don't know. Hey, so Lawrence, I got to tell you something. These 3 hangers needed to be welded first. Really? I thought, no, these ones need to be first, and the other 60 didn't need to be welded. So we have a problem. I don't know how this structure, let's get off it, by the way, can't stand. This is an unsafe condition. And when you look down, this was the 3rd floor down to the lobby. It was 2 stories down, 25 feet down. We've got to evacuate this area. This is an unsafe condition. Fine. So he goes, "Oh, okay, good. We'll get everybody mobilized, and we'll evacuate the area. This is a big problem." Okay. This is kind of before cell phones, and there's cell phones, but I didn't have one. I emailed my boss from somebody's Packard Bell. It wasn't a Packard Bell, but he wasn't there. And I'm like, "Well, we'll deal with this tomorrow." I get back on the plane. I fly back to Boston, 9 o'clock next morning. I go to my boss. I'm like, "Greg, there's this problem down there." He's like, "Yeah, I just saw your email, Mike. How did you know the thing wasn't going to collapse in the last 18 hours? Like, how come you weren't there with a little sheriff's badge just cordoning off that area and coordinating a response? Because that is a bad condition." I'm glad nobody died. I'm glad there was some caution tape. But just next time, don't get on the plane. Realize when there's a real problem and make sure nobody gets crushed. We get you a different plane ticket. And I'm like, "Yeah, you're right." So then there was a repair, and it was no problem. But that was just an example of a mildly amusing story of like things you see every day. And I can think of dozens more screw-ups, which half of I caused, half other people's caused. But that's the industry you go into. It's not the math or equations, it's just the communication. The end, right? So, yeah. Does anybody have any questions about that or commentary of similar situations they ran into? Mohammed, I've got a mic on here which may or may not work here, but just so other people can hear you.
What do you call what you did?
being pseudo-neglectful, but just being focused on worrying and get on a plane is what I call it. But, well,
No, what do you call what you did when you realized that there's something wrong? What motivated you?
uh, what?
It's definitely you didn't do a math, you didn't do calculations, right?
No.
Something that helped you there.
Sure.
Right?
So, so what did I do to realize there was a problem? This is a little bit cute, and this is kind of a unifying thing of this thing is I had a storyline of how the structure was. Like I almost personified the structure. Like the job of the column is to do this. The job of the beam is to do this. And knowing that the job of that hanger was to hold up this floor. That's how I identified the problem. The math didn't matter.
You had good engineering judgment.
It was getting formed slowly. Right?
Well, it was then. Otherwise, you would have just walked home.
Or, oh yeah, look, those bolts look kind of bad. Well, somebody will take care of it. Yeah, it's a weird thing because I'm going to look to some of the principals in the room, and you realize what a lonely job it is to be an engineer. Because when something's screwed up, there's nobody else. It's your job to say, hey, everybody, we got to spend $100 more grand fixing something. Hey, everybody, there's a problem. So that's just to your point. It was my job to say this thing's screwed up at the moment. So I did.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions about this? And I could either turn the mic over to somebody who has a similar story, or we can roll into something else. Dennis Barron. No, he's the one who got the whole Barron family into this design and construction mess. Except for Lisa, who
Can we back up just a little bit? The whole purpose of why we're
hold it close.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Of course, the whole purpose for why we're here tonight is revolves around the students in the room, right? And I'd just like to kind of backtrack a little bit
Please.
and get an idea of the students that are here. RPI, I understand the civil engineering department's represented. Can I see a show of hands, maybe? Or okay, great. And are most of you students?
What about HVCC? You guys here? Yeah.
So we've got HVCC over at this table. Okay. Hey. Are most of the students seniors? Are there any students here that are not seniors? Okay. Juniors, sophomores, freshmen. Okay, well, that was my next guess. Yeah. So I got to believe that for students, the first thing on everybody's mind is, is graduating, and then that they're going to go on and have a career, right? Just to make the point again, tonight is for all you students in the room, and I don't know if you fully appreciate the talent and the background that a lot of the people that are here tonight that are going to be part of this round table have. They're truly experts in their field, and I think it's important as the night goes along that each of you, if you've got any questions or if there's anything you want to ask, that it's important that you go ahead and ask. I think there's going to be a few different themes tonight.
And just to riff off that, just to
Right.
break off the pivoting point,
Right.
and riffing off that, like without putting on the spot, there's an engineer in the audience, Mr. Biggs, who travels the world, Australia, Europe, the pyramids. He's based in the Capital District, but he's a worldwide expert, schlepping around the globe, and it's just there's talent in this room, just to say it. Well, Mr. Barron, do you have a story about your tales of woe and battles in the field?
Well, in case you folks don't realize by now, Mike believes in telling stories and enjoys telling stories, okay?
Because I was subjected
He was
to
subjected as a-
years of stories in the truck going back and forth to construction sites, and he
But,
warped
you know,
all of our brains.
Stories obviously are the best way to learn, right? Because they have a lesson. And I hope as the night goes on here that we all think when we're listening to these stories, we're trying to garner what the lesson is. When Mike first told me he was going to undertake this thing called the Expertise Project, I had no idea what he's talking about, you know. And it took a while for me to have it sink in. And so I started asking the question, like what is expertise? What does it mean? Let me ask a question right here. Of all you students, is there anyone here that does not want to be an expert in your field? I was hoping that there would be somebody that would say they didn't. Because the fact you didn't raise your hand means that everybody here does want to be an expert, okay? So what is an expert? I mean, so I got my cheat sheet with me here.
Don't go through the 17 points. Don't do it.
No, because I think it's important that as we go through the evening,
I understand. I get it.
that we, with all the stories, that we can continually have them lead back to each of us trying to understand in our own mind what an expert is.
Okay.
If we're going to get there, if we want to get there, what is it that we're trying to achieve, right? So I made a list of things that Mike hoped I wouldn't read, but
let me do a prefacing statement, because this event really is a.
I'll make this brief.
We ran it at full speed. We didn't quite know how this whole thing was going to come together. We just know we wanted to have the interpersonal contact, and I was talking to colleagues, Daria, Joe, Lanson's been commenting too. It's a bunch of different things. So this is another viewpoint, please.
Right. So I don't know what an expert is. So I'm hoping that by the end of the night I've got more of an opinion on it. An expert's somebody that's got extensive knowledge, right? Can't argue with that. Experience? I don't know. I know a lot of people with a lot of experience that aren't any better for it, as far as I can tell. An expert needs to have a track record of some type, a successful track record, I should say. He's got to have some kind of stature in his field, ability to think and act independently and creatively. He's got to be resourceful. He should have contacts and relationships in his field. It's nice if he's open-mindedness. Non-arrogance is always good. Team-oriented, willing to accept responsibility, willing to assume authority, good instincts. You got to have an understanding of nuances and relationships. And I think you got to have a little bit of professional courage, and you got to have some ethics, you know. So hopefully as the night wears on and we talk about expertise, each of the stories lead back to trying to establish exactly what expertise is. But
So get up on stage. Let's just do this thing, okay?
no, I'm not going to tell that.
Come on. I'll tell the story for you then.
No, I don't.
Okay. Well,
I'd rather have some of the other folks that got stories. Go ahead. But anyway, students that are here tonight, this is your night. Please make the most out of it.
Yeah. I think all those points, like we were talking before, I think they're all key. And for me, I'm biased and a little warped. I think the common thread is if you're a professional in a certain field, you can take all of those different things and weave it together into a story that makes sense for lots of people so we all can make decisions and act on those stories. I can't make a storyline in electrical engineering or medicine or clearly audio production or video production. Structural engineering, I can come up with a storyline to do it. Yes, sir.
Let's tie Dennis's story and your story together. So Dennis said as an expert, you have to have humility, right? So whenever Dennis and I get together, we talk about these folks that, are a little bit cocky, right? Because
Randy, can you introduce yourself and say what the...
I'm an old retired contractor.
There you go.
And I enjoy teaching. And so when Dennis and I get together, we talk about these things. So the point that you were just making, so there's 3 connections that had to be welded at the beginning and 60 connections that had to be welded at the end, if I understood.
Correct.
Right. So how did the document show that? Was there a big asterisk? Was there ever a quality control meeting, like a pre-work meeting, that said, hey, these 3 connections are critical? Or was your outfit the type of engineer that said, well, geez, if you look at note number 89, exception C, those 3 have to be welded pre-concrete versus post-concrete?
On the spectrum between being a big blinking light put on site and a note buried deep in the documents which nobody read, maybe about here. If you look on this note, it clearly says what, make this connection after or whatever. So if you went to detail 6 on S402, you would have been able to clearly see in the legal proceeding that would have followed that the documents were complete, right? But is that, as a design professional,
Defendant's Exhibit 16, right?
exactly, teeing it up?
850
No,
pages.
we felt
But the
we
slab
fell
already
down.
fell down at that point, right? So my point being too, being with technology, when you think about AutoCAD and things and about cut and paste, there are some critical things. And that humility point, to be able to point that out without reverting back to, hey, clearly there was a note there. One of the things that you talk about, Dennis touched on, when you read your material on the expertise page, is that communication thing. And it's all about communication, and it's all about, there's that opportunity at some point walking through, maybe had you known at a previous site visit, you'd say, hey, remember, those 3 connections are different,
And I'll do, and the whole idea of this thing is to do an open mic and keep going. What I'll do is a truncated version of this other thing. Dad, we don't have to do a long-winded thing on it, but I want to touch on it just as another example to kind of touch on communication and things, something you run into every day. Let's see. Everybody's busy, right? One time, a family member who I won't mention whom gave me a call at 5 o'clock in the afternoon one time and said, hey, I need a quick hand. We've got to do some shoring for this wall for temporary condition. There's a lead up to it, but there's a note in the drawing saying I need to provide shoring that can handle 5,500 pounds every 4 or 5 feet. I'm going to pick it out of the catalog, but I want to make sure it works. Sure, no problem. I'm really busy with different stuff. I have a question that's asked to me. No problem. I can see the length of the brace, which is 18 feet. Okay. 5,500 pounds, 5.5 kips. Okay, I can go to introductory structural analysis to know the Kailer ratio and all this malarkey that just says, at what point does this straw buckle? Pick it out of the catalog. Here's the answer. But then we woke up the next morning, we realized there's a huge problem, which nobody's to fault, but here we are. Like actually, the only picture we have other than this deck up here was just Matt, can you just throw that other picture on just to give the example? And Dad, if I'm not telling the story correctly, you want to feather and fuzz more details, you know where I live. Here's an unnamed project in upstate New York. Right? There's a warehouse addition happening on the side of a hill. Okay, side of a hill, sloping. It's hard to store boxes on a slope. So the design team made 2 levels, a lower level and a higher level, 20 feet difference, which is a big difference. Is it the height of this room, give or take? I mean, that's the height of the wall, right? Dennis Barron and his team were responsible for pouring that concrete wall, where it needed to be, with what reinforcements in what order. Okay, that's his role in that project. And the documents on one section said, okay, well, this wall's not really stable until the entire structure is complete. It happens all the time. This thing is designed as a basement wall, which means that it needs to be grabbed onto the bottom and grabbed on the top, because when you put soil behind that thing, we don't want it to fall over. So in the meantime, until the top slab is poured, the contractor needs to temporarily support this wall. Okay, no big deal. This is where those brace poles were going to grab somewhere up on the wall and come on down, and the whole team was just going to have to live with it. No big deal. On a fluke, on a lark, we're talking about it, and we're just like, oh, this order seems weird because you got to step over the braces for weeks, and that's going to be tough for construction, and then the top slab needs to be tied in. What does that top detail look like? Let me give an example. If I were to jump off a building and I would tie myself to this chair and the chair would be there, I'm tied off to something, but it's not a good life strategy, right? That chair is not going to hold me. I'm bringing the chair with me. This wall was tied to the slab, but that slab wasn't tied to anything. the slab was just going to, as soon as a team full of 20 people with families take those bracings away, the whole wall was just going to fall on them. Because the wall was tied back, but it was not tied back to anything. It's not our project. This isn't an unnamed project where it's like, oh, the Chazen companies really designed a sneaker. No, no, no. This was somewhere else. We talk about it in story form to avoid these things because it doesn't make sense to our team. It's probably not right. What happened was when the whole team got together, the owner who wanted to have this warehouse hired a trusted construction manager. They're pros, and they had a budget to work with. Okay. The design team identified that, geez, I've got a 20-foot wall. That's a thing. So they designed that wall like a cantilevered retaining wall. It's a big, strong wall with a big, strong footing, and when you backfill against it, the wall itself holds back the soil. It's pricey. So somebody else at the CM team goes, you know what, I could save some real money and do my part for the company if I value engineer out this expensive concrete wall. What we'll do is we'll have this wall not be stable, but we'll put geofoam behind the wall. I'm looking at a geotech in the audience, Jared Gross. Geofoam's expensive too, but the idea is, hey, we'll stack up big Lego blocks of foam. They won't fall and push on this wall. So there's no soil pressure. Now this wall can be cheaper. Everybody wins. I just saved the owner $500,000 or whatever it was. And he leaves, or somebody else, Dad, you know the story better, and somebody goes, man, this geofoam's expensive. I'm going to value engineer out the geofoam. Great idea, right? And all we'll do now is we'll put a note saying, temporary shore this wall, the contractor will take care of it, and the project will go fine. But everybody would have died if they took out the bracing. So just because the Barron family talks every morning on the phone, we realized there was a problem. We raised it to everybody's attention. The structural engineer worked in a bubble. He's a pro. It wasn't his fault necessarily, and it wasn't the CM's fault necessarily, but these kind of issues happen every day. What was the solution? The owner, the CM, kicked in some money to design, Dad, stop me if I'm wrong, braces that look like that. Big HSS columns that cost $100,000 to custom fabricate because the load was so huge, you had to put those 5 feet on center all the way up and down that wall. More expensive foundations at the bottom to support the braces. The ties from the top of the wall had to go back like 50 feet. It was a disaster. They saved no money. Lost schedule. Everyone's schedule went to crap because people lost track of what the plan was in the storyline, and everybody was working in their little box. So again, the format of telling little cutesy stories isn't necessarily to say, oh, I'm not going to ever be that guy. That guy sounds like a real, loser. It happens to pros all the time because everybody's so busy. You're just jumping from one thing to the next, and everybody in the room's got these stories.
Mike, can I step in a little
Yeah.
bit? Okay. One of the things that I see coming out of these last two stories that anybody in the construction industry's got to be aware of is that you are responsible for life and safety of people. The structures you design and build have got to have that integrity. One thing I don't think, I know I'm a civil engineering graduate, and one thing I wasn't prepared for when I graduated was the whole contractual part of contracting and construction, right? When you look at the parties to a construction contract, in the classical case, you've got three parties, right? You've got the owner, it's the guy that wants to build something, he's got the money to build it, hopefully. Okay, you've got the architect or engineer, they're a design professional, they're being paid by the owner, and then you've got the contractor whose job is to actually do the construction. And each of those parties are dependent on each other. And nowadays, more and more, you've got a fourth party called the construction manager, and how he fits into the whole picture varies depending on the project, I guess. But to me, this story is really, well, let me back up. And so each of you students that are going to enter the workforce, have you thought at all about which of those three parties that you'd prefer to work for? Would you like to work for the owner that's got a project to build and you'd be his representative? Would you like to be the architect or engineer that's designing that project? Or would you like to be on the side of the company that's actually got to build it? And I think as you get out into the workforce, you got to find out where you're comfortable. Think of it as a three-legged stool. Which one of those legs of the stool are you going to be most comfortable with?
And it's part of the same continuum. Like just riffing off you, like nobody's got an easy gig. Like the architect has to take this nefarious, intuitive vision dream, drag it closer to reality, hot potato to the engineer who drags it a little bit closer to something that's buildable. But the set of documents is never like cookie cutter, build this, and the contractor has to bring it to actually say the nail goes here, and we're all in it together. But you're right, they're different pieces.
But in the construction industry, I think more so than other industries, no matter which entity you're working for, you're going to be real close to the terms of that contract, and you're going to be dealing with money. And I think that's one thing, going to any kind of school that they don't really prepare you for, is the whole idea that when you get out into the workforce, it isn't just the fun of designing, it isn't the fun of building. You got to deal. The money's got to shake out. And when there's issues on a job, who's going to pay? And are you going to go to court, or are you going to be part of a team that's able to navigate their way out of a difficult financial situation and avoid going to court? Because most of us in the contracting field have learned that going to court isn't a winner.
Yeah,
But this example, more than anything else, I think is an example of how each of the parties performed under the contract. We were bidding the job. It was very vague as to what the bracing requirements in this wall were going to be. And we were working as a concrete subcontractor. We were bidding to the general contractor. I asked the question prior to bid. I said, what do we do with this bracing? And I was told, just throw in a few dollars for it. We'll work it out later, okay? So I threw a few dollars in. Obviously not enough, but the general contractor we were working for believed in having a certain individual buy out the contracts and then also be the project manager. So I felt comfortable dealing with him at bid time, thinking he was going to be there to treat me fair when the construction was occurring. He left the company shortly after they accepted my bid, right? And then when you have a retaining wall like that, there's a couple ways of providing the strength to the wall. You could actually have a humongous footing underneath with all kinds of heavy reinforcing bars coming up. And when they backfill the back side of that, the strength of the concrete itself will keep that wall from tipping over. Another thing you could do, and I see a lot of mall contractors doing it, is they really have a very light reinforcing design to the wall, but like Mike said, they put these humongous chunks of geofoam on the back side, which relieves the pressure, but that costs a lot of money. So basically the moral of the story was we got ourselves in a big contractual pickle. The company I worked for did. We hired Chazen. Mike, of course, was heavily involved. And as a contractor, we were in a difficult position where we were challenging the design of a structure. And as a contractor, a non-licensed professional, we couldn't challenge that design without bringing a licensed professional on board. It's a very tricky situation, and Chazen did a great job of coming in and acting professionally and helped us resolve the problem. In the end, the owner agreed to pick up the cost of some very, very, very expensive bracing that, in our opinion, we couldn't have foreseen as having been needed at bid time. So yeah, that was a case of where things shook out as they should have, shook out well, at least for our
because there's no dirty rat.
But it could have turned into a $1 million lawsuit.
Right. As soon as somebody's a dirty rat saying, I'm not paying for this, I'm not paying for this, not my problem, not my problem, everybody lawyers up and it turns into a disaster.
So another moral of that story is that it was important that when the time comes and you're one of those professionals out there, that you behave ethically, whatever that means. You've got to advocate for the company you work for because they're the ones writing your paycheck. But when it comes to an issue of life safety, we've all got to have the courage to stand up and address those type of issues.
Yeah. No, please. All I was about to say was, this is a good segue.
Hi, I'm Daria from Envision Architects in downtown Albany.
Daria, there's a perfectly good stage up here you could stand on. I feel like a little...
I know, I like it over here in the corner.
I'll
Thanks,
slink over
Mike.
here then, that's fine.
Thanks
Okay.
for having us. This is great. So when we're talking about this and talking about these, project crises, oh my God, that moment, right, where your stomach goes into a knot, your face gets red, you realize there's an enormous problem. And once we know that no one died or was injured from it, then we can move on and see what are the other damages that are out there and how we control them. And I think that Randy, is it Randy? Hi, we haven't met yet. When you were talking about humility, it's really, really, really important, because once you get past the, okay, everyone's safe and alive moment of these types of situations, you have to now navigate it with your client, possibly with your bosses, if you have bosses, with the other engineers that you probably have really long-term relationships with, and the other people involved, in a way that gives them confidence in you for the rest of the project. Doesn't have your firm paying tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? And keeps everyone's kind of esteem and motivation up to see through the problem and to work collaboratively and to fix it. So I've made crazy mistakes. I don't want to talk about any of them. I haven't talked about that with my business partner if we want to talk about any of them. It's been a very long time. But I've had those moments where it's in the pit of your stomach and it's in your face, and I've gone in my car and cried and panicked and said, how will I ever get past this? And I guess that couple things that I can recommend for these moments, because you're going to have them when you're messing up in your final reviews or in your thesis project or in your exams or in your group projects, and you're going to move on, right? So a couple tips. You say to yourself, is this one that's going to matter at the end of the week? Is this one that's going to matter in a couple weeks? Is this going to matter half a year from now, a year from now, 10 years from now? And like rein it in and bring that perspective back. And the other advice I have is, whoever you're working with, if it's your fellow students that you feel, I owed it to them to do this stellar job, I didn't do my part, now we're all screwed, whatever. If your relationship with them is good and you've been communicating the whole time about what you've been going through, what you're struggling with, what your other courses are, what you're thinking about, why you decided to take a risk, bringing them on board for that risk with you, those conversations become a lot easier in the end when you're dealing with the crisis. And that goes for the real world, the profession. You're in a real world. I wasn't diminishing that. That goes for the professional world too. We come across these problems that could cost our firms and our clients so much money. Delays, time is money. Those relationships that you have in your professional rapport and your professionalism, and I always say to myself, the mark of a true professional isn't having all these accolades and I did great and I designed this cool thing. It's how do you handle a crisis, how do you handle a situation, and how do you get out of it with everyone coming out with the best end result, right? So, you guys deal with this in your groups and your group projects and with your professors, and those skill sets that you're developing now in school, you're gonna bring out, hopefully, into the professional world. And when you come across a problem, it's that centered feeling of how big of a deal is this, and have I kept everyone in the loop? And it's gonna be a lot easier if you have that perspective and you have that communication going. So I don't wanna give examples, because it would be bad.
Well, what's just funny is that's how the idea for this event kind of started, right? 95% of the time, we're all out there talking about how great we are, and everybody knows. But then all the professionals look at each other and go, "Yeah, remember all those times where we screwed up?" But who's gonna say it in an open forum? And rightfully, we're having internal discussions with the partners that are sponsoring, and it's like, we think it's really important to kind of mentor the next generation and show them what it's like. But how am I going to fork over money to stand up and talk about a time I fell down? It's against human nature. It was proper feedback.
I just don't want to be too embarrassed.
Yeah, me neither. So I kind of gave this event.
You're doing great, though. You're doing great at being embarrassed.
Barron's have an interesting shame meter. We just kind of roll with it.
No, but that's how we teach in the firm too. You can teach from really successful things that you've done, and this turned out great because we did these things. But so many times, if you track back that, why was it great? Why did it go great? How did you get to that thought? I gotta say, most oftentimes, if you track the line down, it's you did that because last time when you tried something else, you learned from it, right? So these learning moments are really important and they're really, really valuable. And they can be embarrassing and terrifying, and you can be up in the middle of the night thinking about them, but they do make you stronger, as much of a cliche as that is. So.
Well, how about we just, because now I frankly want to just hear you talking and Joe talking. Let's pivot to a round table. Does anyone want to take just 5 minutes to grab another drink, use the restroom, buy Phil CDs, whatever you want, And we'll do the round table now.